It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Denise Margaret Thompson. Well, you have your flyers. I'm not going to read the flyer. Instead, I'll just tell you what stands out in my mind about Denise. Well, Professor Thompson was the original program professor in IIEM, as a result of which she was instrumental in setting up that program along with Cambridge University, and that program is going guns. The graduates, I think, are well placed. She will be able to tell you. So to me, that is one of UTT's success stories. But currently, what stands out as far as Denise's contribution is concerned for me would be the UTT Ideas Competition. And again, the IIEM is a feedstock for that. But more importantly, she has taken the lead in trying to establish UTT, and in the process to encourage her academic peers to act accordingly. She's trying to establish UTT as the entrepreneurial institution it was designed to be, as the board wants it to be, as the government of Trinidad and Tobago wants it to be. And as UTT itself, most people at UTT realize we will have to be. So she has taken the lead on this in terms of encouraging people to apply for grant money. She is herself involved in several, as a member of several boards, where hopefully she carries the face of UTT forward. And Denise is articulate. She writes well, so we have a good representative here. Not everybody who's on a board I'm happy to have there, but in her case I am. And last but not least, the dynamite smile. Okay, so those are the main contributions, the UTT ideas, and there are more. I mean, you have your flyer. I'm just talking about from my personal perspective. That push to have UTT become, as I said, the entrepreneurial institution it was meant to be is what I think is one of her greatest contributions. So, and it happens to be the topic of her talk today. So without further ado, Professor Denise Thompson on the Entrepreneurial University.
Thank you very much, Professor Stubbs. So let me just preface it and give all the caveats. This is the same lecture, almost, that I delivered a year ago. Today is the start of Global Entrepreneurship Week around the world. The Kaufman Foundation for Entrepreneurial Leadership out of the US teamed up with the government of the UK. And I think this is the third year Global Entrepreneurship Week is running. It's now in 50, 60, lots of countries around the world. We are partnering this year with the Youth Business Trust, Trinidad and Tobago, and we're starting off with a lecture today on the Entrepreneurial University. Tomorrow we have a Youth Entrepreneurship Symposium at Napa. On Thursday we have the same with a different group of students, young people in South, and then on Friday in Tobago. And along the way, several classes are featuring what we call the national, something about local entrepreneurs. So within classes, we have local entrepreneurs featured. Today, I want us to pull our thoughts around the Entrepreneurial University. And when I looked at the topic, again this year, I was like, I wonder if it's a good time to do the same thing. Should I plead academic freedom and do something different? Conflict, controversy, challenge. Entrepreneurial universities in the startup, the research says, has identified there is significant conflict, there is significant controversy. The challenge is how we manage the conflict and controversy through to a fully functioning, innovative entrepreneurial university. That's a challenge for most places, and it'll be the challenge for you too. Oh, we haven't turned this on yet. Okay. Goal of today's presentation, Kickstart Global Entrepreneurship Week. Why is that? not going to do it. Okay, to kickstart Global Entrepreneurship Week, discuss the concept of the Entrepreneurial University, and then think among ourselves really, what will it take for each of us to contribute to the accomplishment of this mission, vision, objective of the university. It will take all of us. Last year we talked some about possible sources of funding to make it happen. We had, I think, about 50, 58, 60 of our faculty and staff at a workshop earlier this year, looking at developing proposals for EU funding primarily. Hopefully that is going to continue. It's not going to work. Yeah. Let's go.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay, so our innovation challenge at the university, I think, is the third one. For the country, it's developing, the previous administration had identified software, IT, robust light manufacturing. The present administration has 7 pillars, very similar. And I was a little bit amused, the previous administration of Vision 2020, the present administration accomplished developed nation status in 2011. What next for us? Even in the midst of state of emergency and curfew, etc., etc., etc. But for us at the university, developing technology-based and knowledge-based businesses is part of our challenge. I want to get out of this. Okay, when we think of, you may have to come and just push it for me. Make it easy. All right, when we think of innovation, it's a process coming out of basic research. It is not a linear process. So it's not that we go from one step to the next, applied research, development, pushing the idea, then into market. It goes back and forth. It's an iterative process, and you have to be patient with the process. It doesn't happen overnight. It happens at different times and different lengths of time for different programs, different areas, different people. Patience is required. Patience and passion, both at the same time. And for institutions, that can be sometimes very difficult. You have to set up good labs, etc. And I know Professor Stout talks a lot about the labs we have or don't have at the university. That takes time. And then we have to begin to move people onto the path of applied research. It's not just good enough to do papers, etc. We've talked about that over and over and over. We have to identify the potential use. We have, sitting at my side here, our first PhD graduate who is working very hard on trying to move her logarithm, invention, etc. to market. We've got to do the development and then take it to market where it makes enough money for all of us. All right, the whole concept of university has changed over time, and I think in the UK and the US they've done it pretty well. What is the mission of the university? Originally, it was to educate the elite. All right, so only if you're really smart, really bright, you got the opportunity to go to university. Over time in the US, it has changed significantly so that we now have what we call education of the masses. And that's not to say it's less than. It just means that everyone, the assumption that everyone can produce, everyone can benefit. So with the changing mission of the university, some of the propulsion towards meaning has changed as well. Relevance. What is relevance? Practical, pertinent applications to particular needs. And the compulsion now for universities to be relevant, whatever that means within a particular society. The request in the UK to behave more entrepreneurially by government, business and society. Right now we know in the UK that they've removed a lot of the subsidies for universities. So you have all the sit-ins and the protests and all around the world. Wall Street, I hear we have the protests here in Trinidad as well in some forms. To reflect the world of work for which graduates must be prepared to recruit and develop staff to embrace the new agenda. Ignorance about entrepreneurship is not okay within this kind of setting. And within this setting for changing missions, the perception of entrepreneurship and innovation as a distraction, which is part of what often happens as universities change mission, has to move to becoming central to what we do. It's not, well, when you have time left over from your research with food crops or your research with Camry, that you then think about what we do to move it to market. It's central to what we do. With the US, in the UK it's more of relevance to society, etc. In the US, the mission has changed definitely to specific returns to the investment from research. You're required to provide a return to public investment. You have to justify new research allocations. It's very competitive. Tangible outputs from public investment is what they're looking for within the US. Provide a source of new firms. The government in the US is looking specifically to universities to provide the new kinds of knowledge-based businesses that are expected to emerge. Provide services to firms within the innovation ecosystem. So universities are expected to provide new firms and also to provide the services to new firms. A whole different concept. So it's not just the ivory tower and you stay in your dusty tombs in the library or you stay in your labs, but an interaction with industry and with the ecosystem around. Foster skill pools needed for innovation clusters. Big talk now about innovation clusters, and how that is done becomes very, very important. National Academies of Science has done quite a bit of work on that. When we think of academic entrepreneurship, so the mission of universities has changed, basically. So it's no longer just pushing out work, papers, etc. The concept of academic entrepreneurship has moved now where academics are encouraged to also explore the entrepreneurial, commercial side of what they do. So an academic entrepreneurial environment will be characteristic of an environment with active support of knowledge exploitation, stimulation of entrepreneurial behavior among all members of the academic community. And I want you to keep that in mind because I'm going to just rush through these slides very fast so we can start discussing how do we develop a culture, an atmosphere, an environment at the University of Trinidad and Tobago that's characteristic of an academic entrepreneurial environment. Development of institutional structures in the academic community. So I'm glad to see Mr. Joseph just come in because that will be part of his challenge as VP HR. What kind of structures do we put in place to encourage the exploitation of research, to encourage the kind of foment, the work at intersections of disciplines, which is where the most creative work occurs, within an atmosphere that all of us come from very traditional kinds of academic backgrounds. How do we create this new academic entrepreneurial culture within UTT? Some of the key elements of innovative cultures in an academic entrepreneurial setting would be things like proactive behaviors, which means you don't wait for permission, you see an opportunity and you pursue it. How would a university maintain order and encourage change and progress and movement? Proaction in a setting that wants to be or needs to be orderly as well. The innovation process is not an orderly process. How do our structures accommodate for that? Some other kinds of things that would have to be thought about: allocation of resources involving the business sector. Where do we put the money? How do we decide which department gets which funding when all our funding comes, well, most of our funding still comes from the state and it's a set amount. How do we decide how to allocate a pot that is never big enough for the requests? And how do we support innovation and entrepreneurship and the kind of academic entrepreneurial behaviors that we want to support and encourage? And you will notice that I have questions just like you. Together, we are the ones who have to come up with the answers for how we do that. Earlier work on academic entrepreneurship described as research related to exploitation of results, but where you have your research groups formed as firms, quasi-firms. Results routinely scrutinized for commercialization potential. So there's a structure within the system that would encourage and identify those research results that are most likely opportune, etc., for commercialization. System needs to be put in place. Cooperation with external agencies and the triple helix. Triple helix here refers to academia, business, the private sector, and government. All three working together to move this concept forward. Commercial exploitation, including collective entrepreneurship. And here when you talk about collective entrepreneurship, they talk about research that's relevant, means that within the research team, you include policymakers. Relevant researchers mean that within policy-making groups of the government intentionally includes researchers from the scientific community, from the technology community, from the research community. And together that moves research into the arena where it's most useful, which also means that within the infrastructure of the university, systems are going to have to be put in place that would both allow that kind of interaction, encourage that kind of interaction, and ensure that the work of the university is not sabotaged or impacted negatively. Again, that's, I'm glad Mr. Joseph is here because that's kind of some of the things that he'll be looking at. So the entrepreneurial university concept. Individuals engaging in academic entrepreneurial behaviors and spin-off activity. The entrepreneurial university concept. Organizational characteristics and resource endowments of universities involved in spin-offs. The entrepreneurial university concept. Social norms and institutional behaviors consistent with spin-off activity. The entrepreneurial university concept, the wider social and economic context that enables spin-off activity. Which means the whole structure of the university needs to now, at both the reward structure and the organizational structure, the academic side and the corporate side, needs to be structured in such a way that would encourage and support spin-off activity. This is an example of University of Twente in Holland that is big on commercial activity. Lowering the thresholds of the exploitation of knowledge-intensive ideas, empowerment of researchers and his or her ideas. Today we just got I think all the ideas came in from the ideas competition, cut off last night, so I think there were about 110 ideas coming in from all over the university. Most of them, I think Dr. Kenner was proud to say, came from ICT, but almost all of our units, faculty, staff, etc. Then the next step, if we are indeed an entrepreneurial university or an innovative university, how do we lower the threshold for students and staff and faculty to begin exploring the exploitation of those ideas? What are some things we need to do? How do we empower researchers to pursue their ideas? Academic freedom and pushing towards commercialization. Some of the things that they've done pre-incubation in a protected environment for researchers to test market feasibility and support for doing that. Researchers are not marketing or business experts. Do we have systems in place to assist our researchers in identifying the market potential for some of their research? And again, for them, there's no best practice, lots and lots of discussions, leading, hopefully, towards actual best practice. The National Council for Graduate Entrepreneurship in the UK, higher education environment, they've said, And this is now where universities in the UK, they've identified REI as research intensive universities or something like that. So the top ones get all the funding. I mean, they just don't play around with that. And what it's based on is the ability of a university not just to produce research, but to take it to market. Some of the best universities there, of course, are Cambridge. Cambridge is just phenomenal in what it does in that area. Entrepreneurial institutions, entrepreneurial staff, and they have systems in which they identify, they have a rubric by which they would calculate, what level of entrepreneurialism is characterized by particular universities, particular staff, etc. Entrepreneurial stakeholder partnerships, the triple helix. With whom are you involved? Where are your alliances? Where are those relationships? What kind of relationships are they? What sort of knowledge transfer occurs, etc. Entrepreneurial opportunities, looking towards entrepreneurial graduates. What are your graduates doing? Entrepreneurial lives and careers. How are they changing the organizations and communities within which they function? So their vision for graduate entrepreneurship talks about strong leadership, vision, strategy, outcomes, strong culture, values, cross-campus kinds of relationships, rewards for excellence, the level of stakeholder partnership. Some of the things they explore in terms of the entrepreneurial educators. So what do the staff look like? What do the faculty look like? What do the classes look like? Innovative entrepreneurial leader, creative learning practices. We have Professor Rao here who's helping us with exploring what are some of the innovative technologies and learning platforms to support the new learning, the new kind of citizen that this country needs. What kind of teaching practices go into that? And then the entrepreneurial graduate, the person that we put out, what do they look like? What do they do? How do they function? Capable of thriving in an uncertain, unpredictable, complex world. That sounds much like the university. But we want them to thrive in a global world out there, contributing to the bottom line. I think I put this is all going to go up on the web. Some of the aspects of the concept of the entrepreneurial university, the ability to pursue opportunity, and that is reflected in its leadership, governance structures, institutional culture and values, infrastructure and environment. I think for the last couple acting presidencies that we've had, they've all been supportive of the concept. I think right now we seem to have a president and a chairman who are both committed to the idea, the concept of the entrepreneurial university, and hopefully will allow the university to push that concept forward, push that move forward. I think some of us have seen the Innovation Forum that's coming off, organizational transformation meetings, etc. How do we make this real at this university? Capacity, faculty staff development, the enabling environment, institutional venturing. The university itself becoming involved with startup companies and new ventures are an entrepreneurial concept, a controversial concept, not without its own conflicts, etc. But that's what entrepreneurial universities do. We just celebrated the life and legacy of Steve Jobs. When he was starting off in the 1980s, I think late 70s, early 80s, Stanford University invested in him and his work. So when we were graduate students there, we were using all of the exploratory stuff that came off in with 256K little disk drives and what have you. A university that was interested and committed to ventures and venturing. Hopefully, UTT is on that path. We have lots of ideas, business plans, etc. Which ones will we choose to invest in? How do we get our stakeholders in place to be part of the investment culture around this institution? And again, our executive leadership is going to be looking at that. And then student engagement, stakeholder engagement, internal and external to the university. Some of the characteristics of the entrepreneurial university. Major benefits. Entrepreneurial university have significant benefits that have been identified in the literature and data. Positive influence on researchers' careers, prestige, and earnings. faculty at entrepreneurial universities tend to out-earn faculty at less entrepreneurial universities. I'm not sure what the connection is, but this is just what the research identifies. Additional research funds. So who much is given, more is given. And as those funds are explored and exploited, more funds tend to flow, more funds tend to come. Access to proprietary technology and equipment, opportunities for industrial knowledge exchange, increased triple helix activity. The more entrepreneurial the university, the more businesses tend to get involved with the students, with the faculty, with the work, supporting projects, etc. Improve conditions for knowledge-based innovations. Real things that real people use, coming out of cutting-edge research. However, entrepreneurial universities are not without their concerns, not without their challenges. There are negative effects at entrepreneurial universities. The research also identifies heightened atmosphere of cutthroat competition, undermining the culture of collegiality and open science. Resources diverted from long-term fundamental research and teaching activity, so that the normal process of learning at a university, lots of foment around too much money being diverted to exploitation and not enough to the regular ongoing support of teaching and learning. And concerns about the reduced overall quality of the educational product, the traditional educational product. And that is something we have to look out for, and that's part of the concern and challenge. We know that this is what happens. That is what the research says. So as we plan for this institution, those are just some things that we're going to have to think about and allocate for. And then the four major controversial areas. We talked about conflict and challenge. And the challenge is to manage the conflict, understand where the controversies are going to arise, and take care of them. Where are the major controversial areas? Bureaucratic authority of traditional department chairs. So we had started off at this university saying there are no departments. They have to have departments. So we sort of come back to departments and programs. But one of the major controversies that will emerge in an entrepreneurial university is the tension between a department chair, a program leader, and these little upstart researchers who are doing all kinds of interesting, exciting things and off doing their own thing, etc. And will not or may not kind of keep to their place, etc. One of the areas of controversy we know is going to emerge, so we should be expecting it and not be surprised when it happens and kind of bent out of shape. What are we going to put in place to minimize that? Allocation of teaching loads. How do we say how much teaching is enough for faculty who are off doing all kinds of exciting cutting-edge stuff, and maybe getting funding to support the exciting cutting-edge stuff? How do we put in place systems that are fair in terms of teaching, which is part of the normal output of the university? And how to combine that, balance that with the cutting-edge exploitation of research, commercialization of research that we want to occur. That's part of the challenge and a major controversial area. Ownership of research tools, equipment, and materials. Who owns it? So I've gone out and I've gotten a grant and it brings in all this wonderful equipment. It's mine. But it's also a resource of the university. How do we make it widely available to all those who can benefit from it without sabotaging and sacrificing the integrity of the original work that produced the equipment or the research tools, etc.? How do we allow the rapid prototyping, let's be controversial, the rapid prototyping equipment to be widely used without sacrificing the work, the significant work that's going on with the mechatronics area, etc.? Those kinds of concerns become very critical and are only going to increase. The more entrepreneurial we become, we're going to have to put policies in place for that. And then intellectual property rights of researchers, and I'm not going to say anything about this because we now have a WIPO agreement, an MOU in place, and we're going to finally have that discussed so that people will know when students produce commercial output, patentable work, who owns it? How much is theirs? How much is their supervisors? How much is the institution? Who's going to actually commercialize it? It's extremely expensive even to apply for a patent. Who's going to apply for it? We want the exploitation of results. If it's owned by faculty, is the individual faculty prepared to pay the $30,000 US it costs to register a patent in the US? Probably not. And that's just the US. What happens if you want to register it in India so that they don't find it, or China, or elsewhere? Who pays the cost of that? Who owns it? How do we share the costs? How do we share the benefits? Major controversial areas. So these are the 4 major areas of controversy in entrepreneurial universities that we're going to have to look out for. And then the entrepreneurial academic culture, and for many within higher education institutions, concept of entrepreneurship, with its association with business development, provokes an image of shady villainy. A 5th column, knowing where the basic values that define the university, or traditional cultures, etc. A wolf masquerading as a milk cow. And these are actual quotes. So I'm sure we'll have some of them. When our young faculty want to go off and start exploring entrepreneurial areas, how do we support that without squelching and saying, no, that's not your real work? Or, you're really a researcher in plant physiology. I don't know if that's something, but maybe it is. Right, you see? Why you want to go and explore how that's applied now for farms and wherever that could possibly make money. Just focus on what you brought here to do and teach your classes and what have you. How do we balance that? Some of the innovation benchmarks: growth of entrepreneurship innovation community, growth of people involved in it, expansion of networks outside the community, resources coming in, resources allocated within the university, outside the university, customer base. And then some identifiable entrepreneurship innovation skill sets. Risk-taking, innovative thinking, opportunity recognition, record keeping, strategic planning, performance-based decisions. All of those are kind of outside moving when you have to balance all of that with the order and the control that's necessary in a university as well. Challenge for Mr. Joseph. And then lots of opportunities for the triple helix that we talked about, opportunities for collaboration, multidisciplinary research areas and initiatives, how to encourage that, how to support that. Well, how are we going to evaluate your performance at the end of the year? That's not really maritime kind of work, or that's not really agriculture. Or a student coming in. Well, what that student wants to do is agricultural entrepreneurship. Who's going to supervise that student? It's not really entrepreneurship, it's definitely agriculture. I mean, those are real issues, right, Professor South, that we have to work through and have to understand they're coming, and we not to think of it as, oh my God, we've got to get rid of this person, or get rid of that person, or that person doesn't know his place or her place. Or it's all part of what happens at entrepreneurial universities that we have to accommodate for. Student faculty laboratory projects, student faculty industry projects, the validity of work done in industry as against work done in a lab, equipment leasing, opportunities for making money, specific commercialization support, and encouragement as well. So there are lots of opportunities. Staff training workshops, who's going to do those? We had just sort of recommended PEU, can do it, TLC, can do it. Training for research, training for managing research, training for commercializing research, training for proposal writing, training for proposal development, managing those projects, managing collaboration, managing international projects, maintaining records, etc. All of that training that comes with an entrepreneurial university needs to be accounted for and identified. And there are opportunities in collaborations with the private sector to get those done. The possibility of the Innovation and Technology Commercialization Center. Still, who knows? I think Tamina might be not around. I don't know. How do we do what we think we want to do when so many of our resources come from one funding source, who may or may not be able to identify, limit, control, expand, encourage? I don't know. And then here at UTT, we have the Caribbean Invention and Innovation Center. It's primarily looking at, you bring an idea, we will build it. We also need both other sides of that. So yes, you bring the idea, we can make the prototype or the model for you, but we can help you come up with the ideas, new product development, and we can help you take it to market as well. So the whole range of activities along the innovation value chain needs to be explored and encouraged as well. Some of the benchmarks of success. And first talk about how much time we have left. 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Oh, good. So, no, this is it for discussion. For discussion now. UTT is still we are 7 years young. We're still a young university. Aspiring and evolving entrepreneurial university, innovative university, etc. What role should UTT be playing in the national discourse, in the national effort? What role should each of us be playing in the university effort? What systems and procedures can or should be put in place to encourage the benefits associated with entrepreneurial universities, the prestige, significant prestige, national, international, while minimizing and avoiding the distractions of the conflicts and controversies that will be there? All right, so it's not a surprise. Those conflicts and controversies are going to be there because that's what happens at entrepreneurial places. The challenge for us is, what do we put in place to manage those? And now this is time for you to talk back to me, with me, etc. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. We have about 15 minutes for questions, but I should have said something initially, and that is I should have made the apologies for Professor Sharaf, the Vice Provost of Graduate Studies, who always attends these meetings, but who is at a workshop on energy studies. So with that...
So I shouldn't take it personal?
No, don't, please. He said that.
He told me himself.
So I open the floor, questions for Professor Thompson.
Discussion, yes, sir.
Yeah. As you know, I've been on Earth for a long time.
A little longer than the rest of us.
And maybe 20th century activity in relation to entrepreneurship is what I'm addressing. And it's not really such a long time ago. There's a place called Kariri. And I thought, when it appeared at UWI campus, which it still is, that it was in the wrong place, geographically speaking. And having joined UTT recently, hope you know what I mean by Kariri.
Everybody knows.
Okay. Caribbean Industrial Research Institute, which was meant to do the sorts of things that we were talking about, to take research activity from, say, the Faculty of Engineering at UW and commercialize it. And I'm saying Kariri still exists, whether it's doing it or not. And I didn't hear you once mention Kariri. I wondered whether we were friends or enemies in this context.
I didn't mention UWI or USC or Edinburgh. No, because the discussion today is innovation and entrepreneurship at UTT.
Yes. Okay.
The stakeholder engagement is extremely important. All our stakeholders. So, for instance, one of the projects that we are doing, CRU is an associate. So they're not a partner with us on the project, but they've been working with us and coming to the meetings. We go to them. I think we have a meeting over with them.
This is Coco Research.
Coco Research Unit. So similarly, we've been to a lot of the meetings at Kariri. Kariri has been very supportive in the early days of the IIM program. In fact, it talks about guerrilla marketing. You know, we want to get some of the UWI students to even consider some of the wonderful programs we have here at UTT. And Kariri has offered its space, and we've worked over with them. And Mr. Alisha
Sure.
has been just wonderful in that we've not done much actual commercialization work. It's been very expensive. The cost of some of the work that our students have put out in the IIM program, the testing or what have you, would cost like 30,000 to get some organoleptic testing done.
Taste testing and so on. That is good, really charges you to do it. That's why I
Significant.
friendly you are.
So we're very friendly. Once you pay the bill, it's very
Once you
friendly.
pay the
Yeah, then you have to live too.
If
Yes.
I may comment on Professor Seaport's comment, Curry is now, to me, less a research institution than a testing institution. Curry has turned itself into essentially a commercial entity where they simply take jobs and services.
That's
Yeah,
services
it's
rather than
it's not research. And in terms of doing organoleptic testing, you don't need Curry for that. Organoleptic testing is simply knowing how to set it up and carry it out and how to measure the response of the people on the taste panel. So anytime you want to set up one,
Come and check you. Yeah.
Right? But,
I don't have students directly doing that now, but I know we
but
check
that
into
you don't need career for that at all. As a matter of fact, career's main advantage is that they have the equipment. They have the equipment, lots of equipment to do different tests. But that is intellectual equipment. And that is what UTT has. But at any rate, what I want to do for your next talk, what I want to talk about, you mentioned but did not amplify on, because it really is not quite a part of this, and that is preparing students for the world of work. That's a different thing from entrepreneurship per se. And the other thing where I think, again, the other thing that needs to be developed is the marketing. Again, marketing is an intellectual equipment, is what you need. You don't need to buy an expensive piece of equipment to market. But commercialization is nothing without marketing, because you need...
But the first step, which is one of the things I talked about. Where do we provide those services? Is this commercializable in the first place?
Well, this is it. So the thing about it is, again, it is not that difficult for us to develop certain marketing practices. Here, it is as part and parcel of the whole entrepreneurial thing. You don't need to pay a firm to do that.
We will need to have a system in place
Right.
and resources allocated to provide those services.
Well, right. But again, marketing is all about focus groups and surveys. You know, and psychometric...
But somebody has to do it. Somebody has to do it, somebody has to be allocated to
It can be
do it.
done. There are skills available amongst staff at UTT to do that. So I'm just trying to keep that in the back burner. What I want to talk about, I think where a lot of the controversy about the entrepreneurial university arises, you see that phrase, knowledge-based innovations. The controversy arises because there are people who believe, and I am one of them, that you have, some part of the university has to provide that knowledge before it can leap off and be entrepreneurial. Now, there is knowledge based when there's simply domain knowledge. You know, somebody knows a little business area very well. They may not even be literate, they may not even be able to sign their name, but they know that area inside out and probably will be a better entrepreneur in that area than anybody with a PhD or something who doesn't know that. So I'm not talking about domain knowledge, business domain knowledge. I'm talking about scientific knowledge or knowledge that the institution can provide. And with that knowledge, you see the opportunity for taking that knowledge and taking it out into something, into a commercial product. So somebody has to provide that knowledge. And why I say this is where the controversy arises is like the question about whether an entrepreneur is born or made. That is still open to question. And why I say so, in the four things you mentioned, the four controversial areas, one was allocation of teaching rooms, ownership of research tools and IP rights of researchers, well, if somebody's going to get their teaching load considerably reduced so that they can
And again, because our research.
Andrea's correct me. Sorry, that was business plan.
Okay.
That was business plan, sorry.
And again, because we have to, there needs to be some emphasis, some approval, what's the word? That this is who we are, this is who we are, this is what we're doing, and it's encouraged. And it's encouraged. So Professor Sharaf and how many of our graduate students, some part of what they do ought to be, what is the commercial potential of the research that I'm doing, of the work that I'm doing? And that needs to be explored. But coming back to the other question about entrepreneurs or are they born or made, etc., what we're producing, I think we need to discuss that as well. There's a difference between an entrepreneurial graduate and a graduate entrepreneur. And we need to produce both. Companies want employees who can think entrepreneurially. It's a way of thinking, it's a way of looking at resources and identifying opportunities. What are some things that we can do? That's what companies want. Companies want people who can contribute to the bottom line. That's an entrepreneurial graduate. That's who we should be producing. But we also want to produce some graduates who will take the risk of starting those companies that will grow and produce wealth, not just for themselves, but for the country. We do both.
Professor?
Yes, sir.
I just want to take off from where Professor started left off. And I want to just focus on this one of your controversial areas, which is the allocation of teaching rules. I don't think we may have time to get into the other areas, but I just want to just concentrate on that one. You know, I was reminded some time ago by another professor that we're both academic and entrepreneurial.
We would like to be.
And he proceeded to say we're first academic and then entrepreneurial. And so we focus on an entrepreneurial university, but I want to just put that in a particular context. Because it raises a lot of questions in my mind, because people take this term and they run away with it. And to what extent do we have our lecturers focus on academic and get into entrepreneurial activity? To what extent do we allow that without some kind of clear guidance in terms of balance? Because what we do in fact have happening is that we have lecturers who just, I don't want to use the word disappear.
Yeah.
It may be a very strong word, but you know, some of the instances that I've come across, they disappear and they get into what is called entrepreneurial activities, and they say, but this is an entrepreneurial university. And you know, they turn around and they say, well, Mr. Joseph, you need to make up your mind. Do you want us to get into entrepreneurial? Is this an entrepreneurial university or not? And they use that as a means of justifying a kind of behavior. And so while we have this enshrined in our mission and our vision, I'm not too sure the policy framework for guiding how we should actually get into this activity is in fact in place. And in fact, whether we are really ready for all that obtains in this concept of an entrepreneurial university. And you made mention of a top-down approach, where at the state level, I mean, most of our funding comes from the state. And so that they may have policy concerns that they would look to the university to solve. That's like a top-down approach.
They should.
And they should. But what I'm saying, there's also a bottom-up approach in terms of, at the level of the university, seeing the opportunities, at the level of the opportunities for entrepreneurial activity, and budget that into our activities so that when the funding comes, it takes care of that.
This is the extreme, Mr. Joseph. Can you say that? Can you repeat? Can you repeat that comment again?
When I came here, one of the first questions I asked is, how is it we do budgeting here? And it seems to me that before you begin to talk about budget, you have to identify all the things that you want to achieve. And part of what you want to achieve will be some of those entrepreneurial opportunities. If you really want to focus on entrepreneurial
It should be
activities,
reflected in the budget.
and then it's reflected in the budget, and that's a bottom-up approach. And so you can justify all the things you want. So when it gets at the ministry, at the state level, and they see merit in it, well, of course, it's not just putting it in the budget, it's actually working it. Because you know, you put it in the budget and you don't work, it gets cut. We do know how the thing works. Okay?
I like the sound of this.
That comes down to the thing. But there's one last thing I want to mention. My concern is whether you really want the lecturers.
Whether we really want.
Right, whether we really want the lecturers who would have the responsibility of creating a student who thinks entrepreneurially, as opposed to having them fully engaged in entrepreneurial activity. Because it's one tend to be at the expense of the other, except you can find a very delicate balance, which I see is very difficult and challenging at this time. And that's why there is discussion now of setting up a business development unit. A business development unit that looks at the whole aspect of, one aspect has to do with commercialization of research and a whole number of other areas that you can take to the next level. But there is a unit set up for doing that. And it removes from our lecturers who are to engage in the core business of developing a type of graduate, that responsibility of actually getting into the entrepreneurial activity, which can significantly take away from their core business. That's one way of looking at it. So you have a separate unit that focuses on that. The business of pursuing funding and grants and grant funding and things like that. Because those are very demanding activities, and they are in fact full-time activities. And to begin to engage our lecturers and our professors in some of those activities really take away from their core business.
And because
that's an option.
So we are talking all of a sudden that the subject matter expert is not on the table anymore.
No, we're not saying that.
Let me just engage with you on a couple of levels here. And I'm actually glad that we're on record here, because what you said initially is of course what we've been asking for.
Are we on record? Are you recording it too? Or just streaming it?
What we've been asking for a long time, a budget process, as you say, and an HR environment that is supportive of initiative and entrepreneurship. Meaning that indeed, if I know what my budget is, I can plan.
Yes.
And if I know that the university has provisions to accept funding, so I can actually go out, and when funding comes in, there is a structure in place that would allow the university, like other universities, to receive that funding, charge a certain overhead of 7 or 8%, and then provide the kind of environment that allows me as a researcher and academic teacher to actually engage in research, which comes to the last point that you made, where that's why I was reacting to it, that indeed any academic needs support when it comes, or most of academics would need support when it comes to commercialization.
Absolutely.
However, and that is of course why business development office needs to be there. But of course, and when it goes to negotiating licensing fees and so on, no, I would assume the academic researcher is probably taking a step back and let the professionals deal with it. However, when it comes to writing proposals and grants, that is where the subject matter expert is first and foremost, and then supported by the business development office.
I'm also happy to hear you say that, because we have those experts right here, and I'm amazed to know that we have those experts right here, but we're not optimizing them. And that is why coming out of that business development unit, we put that all of that. The same place. Before Professor stuff, I just want to be very realistic with this whole thing. Most of our funding comes from the state. But what is happening at the state level? We also have to be very realistic. The state has to be borrowing to meet some of its obligations. They are the sectors, various sectors of the economy that they will have to treat with. You have the unions on one side, they still have a lot of matters to negotiate and things like that. Those are the realities, so that the corporation soul has to decide how it's going to allocate funding to one entity, which is the university environment. And so while you're going to get some funding from the state would expect that the university as an entity will take its own initiative in creating funding. And that is why a business development unit is so critical for this organization. Because somebody has to pursue funding.
Can I stick a pin right there?
Could I ask you something?
I'm just wanting. I would hazard a guess that no government would say no to a university that approaches it and says, I'm not asking you for money, I'm asking you for an investment. Most of external funding that we go after requires a match.
Yes, okay, all right.
We don't have the match.
Okay.
So you are limited now. You want to go out for €1 million, but you have to match €200,000 to get 800,000. Will our government set aside a competitive pool of funds for universities can then say, I can go off and I know that I have a match?
Yeah, but you see, there's a tendency to do that once they can see that the end result of all of this is something that is going to benefit the wider population, is going to benefit all of us in this country.
If I could ask something that is right in the middle of all of this, and I don't agree with Uli that the grant writing, because that's what I have as my top thing here, application requires the domain expert. I think it requires a grant writing expert, and I think this is where Professor Thompson could come in. Because that was my top
I say I need to be part of writing this grant because I think
helping now. I'm talking about helping. The domain expert is necessary, yes, but what we want, what I would like is a development, not as part of the business development unit, the development of a unit for grant application writing support. Support. You see this business that Denise just said, you need a match. Lots of people don't know that. No, she is going
and especially for competitive funds, you are going up people who are submitting proposals that are written by experts.
And using that, right, but just knowing where the funds are, where to apply is important. I think if we did that, if we develop that, that will show the government that, because that's what we're going to have to do as we get less and less government support. We have to put in more and more grants. And I had that was my top thing because I missed that one, where the 60 staff members are to make it. And I wanted to make it, yes. We should have those several times a year, but we really need some experts.
We could get that training in grant writing and things like that.
But it's more filling out the application. You know, a lot of people can write the project and write the proposal. They have to write it within the context. There are little tricks of the trade, of the general grant application trade. You have people who get millions of dollars in grants, not because they're great researchers, but they know how to get a grant.
Or as soon as you're ready for that help, we can talk on it. We provided that help for another university, and they all came in and they ran the whole session and things like that. And we have people here who are part of this whole thing, right here at the university here, who can also lend some significant time.
That is the kind of help I think the academic staff needs. But the other thing I want to see, you know what is the other thing I think we can do to justify to the government that we are spending their money wisely, is develop a student prepared for the new world of work. Absolutely. As you yourself said, not everybody is going to be an entrepreneur. Somebody has to buy, somebody has to vent, somebody has to buy. We can't all be entrepreneurs. But if we could be producing graduates,
and function entrepreneurial.
but if we could, let me tell you what is also entrepreneurial thinking. When I go into that job, I'm going to do everything I can to make my company succeed. That is entrepreneurial thinking, and that is a graduate who's prepared for the world of work. So that's what we need to do. We need to make sure that the things we teach are connected to the world of work out there. We need to teach people professionalism. So relevance, yes, but we also need to teach people professionalism. We need to teach people that when you go out there, you need to be able to think. All the things we're teaching you now is not just for you to regurgitate it on an exam paper or to cut and paste in a group project. But you cannot embarrass yourself and your team when you go out there. You need to be able to think.
Yeah, but you don't
Wait,
talk
two things. Two things. Which are the universities against which we're benchmarking ourselves? Which are the universities that we're attempting to be like? I mean, I have some examples. National University of Singapore, fantastic. Cambridge, fantastic. And no, they're not so far removed from us that we can't learn from them and begin to structure things in place. MIT, yes, I know it's a top tier, first tier research institute, but they started off somewhere and worked their way. Who against who are we benchmarking ourselves? One. And then the second thing is that there's a difference between people going around pursuing their entrepreneurial opportunities and people who are pursuing entrepreneurial opportunities within the constructs of the university.
And that is my concern. Within the construct of the university. And not their own thing.
And that is a challenge for our administration to put those policies in place. And we're not doing things from ground zero. There are other universities that have wonderful policies that we can find, we can do, we can adapt. But we're not starting from scratch.
Remember, before Cambridge was perceived as an entrepreneurial institution, it was perceived as a center for intellectual thought. Okay? A center for intellectual thought. Before MIT became entrepreneurial.
Cambridge started off as the thing that Oxford was entrepreneurial.
No, but Cambridge was benchmark, trying to benchmark itself very Oxford. It positioned itself as the anti-Oxford. It positioned itself as a competitor. Oxford was the initial one, but Cambridge wanted to be like Oxford. But before MIT became an entrepreneurial thing, it was, their emphasis was on technical and engineering development. Okay? So
are you saying that one has to precede the other?
No.
Yeah,
Just understand how it
no, yes, that is kind of, I'm saying you have to have a foundation.
And then,
I'm saying you can't decorate the second story of a house without a foundation. You have to have the foundation. This is like trying to light up your second floor, you have no bottom floor.
okay, but then here, that's where we come in when we talk about undergraduate education.
Yeah.
And we're talking about, though, not the sage on the stage anymore, talking for 50 minutes, but we're talking about educating our students in terms so they become creative, they start understanding what their own role is as students, and they become responsible. And that's done by different, new pedagogical approaches that, of course, you are well aware of, that kind of spawn the kind of responsibility that you have to yourself being in a university. This is the kind of things that these are the pieces that need to be
You see that sage on the stage as opposed to guy on the side business. I think that you have to start off as a sage on the stage. The last time I heard that quotation, you don't want to be the sage on the stage, you be the guy on the side. By definition, a guy is in front. By definition, in first year and second year, you know much more than your students. It's not a partnership. I think.
But the students don't come in with no knowledge at all. So that's why it's very controversial. And how you implement it is another thing. It doesn't mean that you have to have one or the other.
You know what? Lead by example. Don't be the fraud on the stage. be the sage on the stage.
Why?
You know, because everybody could sit down and learn from a sage. You see, people feel.
But it doesn't mean that it has to be one or the other.
No.
So what is the, what is
Actually, that's what she said.
That's one second. Please,
Okay. I spent 9 years at UWI in the School for Registered and Research. And they argued back and forth about two streams of staff, which comes to Mr. Joseph's point about HR requirements. There is a bunch of people who will work in a university who are just teachers. There are a bunch of people who gravitate towards research. The UWI model was moving towards separating the two and having two streams. Of course, the ones who were categorized as teachers, because that's what they did, didn't want not to be part of the research stream. They wanted to be in the research stream because somehow it was more attractive, maybe more money and whatever. And as a result, the whole thing flopped, it never happened. But it's still that way in time, a teaching stream and a research stream. What's coming out of this for me is that we're not talking about three streams. There's a teaching stream, there's a research stream, and there's the entrepreneurial stream. Because there will be researchers who don't give a damn about whether they make $10 million out of making pencils that don't need to be sharpened. They just want to do the research. There are guys who mightn't care so much for doing the research, but they want to go in and see what I can take this thing and how I can develop it, and there will be the ones who will do the research and want to develop it, and there will be the ones who just want to teach.
And can you get those working together, is a question.
Yes, and how are you going to decide among the three how you're going to divvy up the spoils, money that's there? Now, if you are talking about, you call it a triple helix, where you're talking about linking the researchers with the government, with the industry. And if the government is supportive, and you can link your work to tie it into what industry wants done, then the three will work together. But a major problem that UTT has is that UTT does not communicate. Nobody in here knows what is going on this campus. Far more to know what's going on the other campuses, and we are very sadly misunderstood institution. All that's out there in the public domain is that we're right.
Yeah.
They compare us to UWI. You can't compare us to UWI, it's chalk and cheese. I mean, okay, so we teach, we do research, but one is 50 or 60 years old and one is 7 years old. It's a child compared to another.
One is also part of a regional institution.
Exactly.
That
So
is a big difference.
we have a problem in that UTT does not market itself. UTT doesn't tell people what we do, what we know how to do, what we would
we're
like
not
to do.
quite sure who we are.
But there is not, so we need to market ourselves. And I think if we market ourselves with our skills and capabilities, then industry will say, I like that idea. Pencils that don't have to be sharpened. Let's go and talk to them. So the first step of the game is to talk to each other, tell people about us, and then the rest of the stuff will
But I
come
think,
together.
to be fair, this acting president is starting on that process. So I've seen a document out. I want to know what you plan each program, what you planned last month, what you plan for next month, what you plan for the term.
So that's supposed to supply I wasn't sure.
I want to know. So if we don't know who's supposed to supply it, at least there's somewhere now where that information can be centralized so that somebody knows what's happening across the university. Then what you do with that information, how do we get the word out for the wonderful stuff that's going on here at UTT?
See, that brings me back to, you spoke about the triple helix, outside, like the government, the private government, UTT connection. And you talk about the triple helix, so for instance, as could be applied inside the university, where you say there are the researchers, there are the teachers, and there are the people who market. And of course, there's people, as you said, they may have all three capacities and interests, and there's others who may not. But the part is the interesting, or the challenge is, of course, to make them compatible so that the teaching allows for people to be entrepreneurial. That doesn't mean everybody needs to be an
Oh, I was trying
entrepreneur.
to
And the
Boyer's
researcher.
dimensions of thing says that there are no pure teachers, pure researchers.
Exactly.
So it's teaching, there's scholarship, we're all scholars.
So what I'm talking about is that triple helix applied inside here and actually visualize how teaching and entrepreneurship and research and how it all, and learning how it all ties together. And I think what I heard you say, Selena, was that we have a problem finding how we are connected that way.
I think-
And it's not a matter to isolate it from each other. But what I hear you say is bringing it together, and this is probably what we are searching about when we meet in our future meetings on
I think it's a matter of mutual respect. You know, every time Selena mentioned teaching, she prefaced it by just the teacher, just teaching. And this is the reason why the teachers probably wanted to be part of the research. I think what we need is a separate but equal
Yes.
understanding. There's not just teaching, okay? It is teaching. Huh?
You know what happened with separate political, right?
Well, it depends. Yes, but the thing about it is,
That's where the policy framework.
the thing about
That's
it
where
is,
we need you.
we have to recognize that without a foundation, and there is also teaching in research. So teaching and research are not mutually exclusive. A lot can be taught in research, but this is the problem. This is the problem, I think, with UTT. UTT does not have supervisors who understand that when they supervise a graduate student, they must train them. That is how I went through graduate school. I was trained by my supervisor. A lot of what I learned, besides the graduate courses I took, I learned from my supervisor. You have to train a student. You don't tell a student, okay, it's independent research, so I have nothing to offer you. You do everything yourself. You develop, you originate your own project from A to Z. That's craziness. An incoming student cannot develop a graduate project from A to Z. If so, what do they need to follow? So
Well,
teaching
in many
permits
places,
everything.
in many places it also is that supervising graduate students is part of your teaching load. So
Right.
all of this
that's teaching.
comes
Yes.
together.
Teach,
Right.
teach and research.
Right. So there's support built into the system for that to happen. But if
Exactly.
you're in a system where it's not built in, it makes it more
You know,
difficult.
the graduate
More
students
challenging.
actually carry out the research so that they can get, well, in science we say they can get good hands. But even in social research, just being able to, a student being able to carry out the focus group on their own or administer a survey. But it's still need help in designing it.
Can I respond?
Absolutely.
When I said just teaching, I didn't mean it in a derogatory manner.
I know you did, but.
I meant it as teaching people who have no interest in doing research. People who have taught for 40 years and 40 years later, they're teaching the same thing that they taught 40 years back.
Oh, we don't need any
Very, very.
Oh, yes. We don't want that, but they exist. They do not want to do research. There are people who are academics who refuse to supervise graduate students. So those are the ones that I would call just the teachers. They're not
Selena, you know what happens?
they're not into supervision.
Selena, our world has changed so much that when we have teachers here, teaching what they taught 40 years ago, I don't care how basic, basic physics, basic math, basic what have you, you are not preparing our students for the world.
As people say, it's not 40 years of teaching experience, it's teaching experience 40 times.
But if they update their information, but they still continue to teach,
If they update the information,
no,
that's too often.
it's more about educating yourself than conducting research. It's possible for you to educate yourself without conducting research.
It's research too.
And it's just relevant.
I mean, even as you update your material and update your work and update, that's research.
Well, it's actually just as you teach with research, because as you get your first students and you interact with the students.
Professor Thompson, there's another point I want to make, but we have to stop.
Yes.
I think we have to leave the other points for the next time.
For the next
Next seminar.
For the next seminar. This is exciting, but I'm watching the time. I see the
You
time.
would have
Way past
Who
it.
robbing this tree?
Anyway,